Okay, so we've talked about DeFi infrastructure, what zero knowledge proof is, and the science behind it. And we've explored all kinds of new and exciting applications for privacy-centered technologies. Now we're going to get two really interesting perspectives on the current state of online privacy and how decentralized systems can be a part of a future in which we all enjoy more robust digital privacy rights. Though, as we'll discuss, that future is still very much in question. So please welcome Marta Belcher, president of the Filecoin Foundation, and Jay Stanley, senior policy analyst at the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. Thanks for joining us, both.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, I'm going to dive right in. Marta, I'd like to start with you. Something that I've noticed in your writings and talks lately is that you said you believe right now we're experiencing an inflection point for privacy rights. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so, I think that cryptocurrency in particular has actually led to a moment where, particularly in the area of financial privacy, we really are at a moment where things could go in one direction or a very different direction. So what I mean by that is this. And we can dive into this a little more, but back in the 1960s, 1970s, the idea that your data would be in the hands of a lot of third parties was something that was really, I think, just not exactly how the world worked. And so at the time, there was this thing that was developed called the third-party doctrine. And the idea behind the third-party doctrine in the United States is, by default, we all have, reasonable expectation of privacy in things like, our transactions. But what happened with the third-party doctrine is the idea is if you have given any of your information to a third party, then that information no longer has a reasonable expectation of privacy, meaning that the government can get that data sort of willy-nilly without actually needing to go and get a warrant. In the 1970s, that was not a big deal, right? It was a very different world. Today, all of our daily interactions involve us sending information to third parties, right? All of us right now are transmitting a shocking amount of data to, our phone companies, to Google, to, our Wi-Fi, right? There are all these levels of infrastructure where almost everything we do, including our location, but also including our financial transactions, is given to a third party, which means it has, effectively no protection, right? Because we have this lack of a reasonable expectation of privacy, meaning the government can get that information without a warrant. And so, for a long time, the Supreme Court in relatively recent years has been kind of chipping away at the third-party doctrine. And I think if we actually were to get the issue in front of the Supreme Court again squarely when it comes to something like financial transactions, we may well, with this Supreme Court, actually have the third-party doctrine overturned, which I think is absolutely critical for privacy rights. And I think that cryptocurrency really pushes that, really brings that to an inflection point, because suddenly we're at this moment in time where there are all these sort of laws, things like the Bank Secrecy Act and other laws where that are basically mass surveillance for financial transactions, right? And so what happens with that is those are based on the idea of the third-party doctrine. You can do that. Why can they do this mass surveillance? It's because we have all given this information to third parties. But suddenly we have tools. We have transactions that they are truly private, and or where you have a group of people who really deeply care about the privacy. And so I think particularly when it comes to financial transactions, we're at an inflection point where we have the opportunity, because of this technology, to really get to a better place and no longer have the third-party doctrine.
Okay, thanks. Jay, what are your thoughts on whether we're at an inflection point for privacy rights?
Yeah, I share that feeling. It seems like there's a gathering storm of new technologies, and that there's a looming showdown between the potential of these new technologies and what the government is going to accept and not accept. For example, with Zcash. If Zcash became huge, to what extent would the government accept it? or would it move to shut it down? And in particular, to what extent will there be space for ordinary people and ordinary transactions, especially, to have financial privacy? It's interesting about the third-party doctrine, and my colleagues, I'm not a lawyer, but my litigator colleagues have been working for years on trying to undercut that, most successfully with a case called Carpenter, in which the Supreme Court ruled that despite the third-party doctrine, the government has to get a warrant to get your historical cell site location data held by your telecom provider. And so, there's optimism that the court will fix what was always a bad legal doctrine. But I think that at the ACLU, our position is that we do recognize that the government has has important interests in monitoring very large transactions. We want to have a society based on taxes, and you can't have a society based on taxes if nothing can be enforced ever. But at the same time, we're seeing the tendrils of this surveillance system moving from very large amounts down into ordinary people and ordinary transactions. For many years, it was the case under British common law and American law that the government could not get your private papers and effects and diaries, even with a warrant, because it was regarded as basically forcing you to testify against yourself. And there was a big ruling to that effect in 1860, and basically some historians have argued that because the court failed to distinguish between corporate privacy rights and individual privacy rights, and it was impossible to have sort of a regulatory state and curb the excesses of the huge sort of Gilded Age companies and trusts who were abusing farmers and so forth. That basically, because of that failed distinction, we lost our personal privacy rights. They threw out the baby with the bathwater in some ways. And so I think that in some ways there's a risk that we need to find a way to not, strip the government's power entirely to watch any financial transactions while protecting ordinary people and ordinary transactions. And I think that is a political problem, but it's also a technological problem. And a lot of this crypto magic that we've been hearing about today may come and may allow that to happen. For example, a paper was written that talked about how you can use zero-knowledge proofs to have a central ledger where the keeper of the centralized ledger is blinded to the transactions unless they reach a certain threshold. And so obviously there's a lot of research being done and that needs to be done in this area, but in some ways for us that is the problem that needs to be solved.
Okay, so those are great responses. They're really interesting. I want to back up a little bit because there may be some folks in the room, I'm among them, who want to just kind of push on something here, which is here we have the president of the Filecoin Foundation, representative of the ACLU. There's kind of like an inverse version of the question I'm about to ask for each of you. For you, Marta, I'm curious, as Filecoin is not, strictly speaking, a privacy project, right? You use zero-knowledge proofs as part of the system, but as compared to other folks we've had on stage today, not strictly speaking a privacy project. So what is your interest in privacy? And I think that's obvious for the ACLU, but for you, Jay, what is your interest in cryptocurrency? So I'll let you go first, Marta.
Yeah, so, Filecoin is really all about baking civil liberties into the fundamental infrastructure for the next generation of the web. So, as of right now, when you go to a website, right, on today's internet, it is almost certainly being hosted by one of three major companies, right? That one of those three major companies, Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, is actually the one that is in control of that data. For us, we really envision a better version of the web where people are in control of their own data. And so that's really the idea behind Filecoin, which most folks in the room probably know, but I typically explain it as like Airbnb for file storage. So basically, people all over the world can rent out extra storage space that they have on their hardware. Others can rent that storage space, and those people are in control of their own data. So for us, this is really a way to bake civil liberties in to what we see as a fundamental piece of infrastructure for the next generation of the web.
Great. It's about you, Jay.
I mean, we like privacy. We like things that are decentralized, so there's no centralized power. It empowers individuals. We see huge problems with the current financial system. Number one, and a lot of comparisons have been made between greenbacks and dollars. And right now, we're sort of in the greenback era before the Civil War, when there was no government money. It was all banknotes issued by private entities. And now, if you want to transact digitally, in many ways, we don't have a public good. We don't have a dollar. And so one of the problems is that you have to use private companies. They surveil the hell out of you. Everybody's trying to ask all the credit card companies and the large banks like Citibank and so forth, like, what are you doing with the customer data? And they are stonewalling reporters, will not answer those questions. We know they're data mining details of your smallest transactions. They impose fees that exclude a lot of people, and so forth. And so we are interested in seeing given the new world where there's so much demand for at a distance and online transactions, we are interested in seeing people have the option to use something that is cash-like. And I don't really care about crypto, honestly. If crypto is the solution, then great. Yeah. If it's a CBDC that is privacy protective, that's great too. And the CBDC could be based on a blockchain. It could be based on a centralized ledger with privacy protected by ZK. I mean, I don't know, but like, I'm not coming from like, I'm pro crypto, and so let's make that the solution. I'm coming like, this is the problem, and I'm open to any solution that fixes it.
Okay, and and you've been in the crowd for I think the whole day. So, what do you think? Has this moved the needle for you at all as to whether or not some of the solutions are here or close?
I mean, I am a huge proponent of these privacy-protecting technologies like ZK, and this is one of the messages that I've been saying in many different arenas, that like, we have this crypto magic, we need to start using it. For example, two guys came up with a cellular network. So you get a cell phone where the cell phone is blind to your location and to your data flows using like ZK-type cryptography. I don't know the details. And so that it's a proof of concept. Why isn't Verizon adopting that? Why aren't they blinding themselves to all of our data? Because they're making a ton of money by using an accidental feature of the cell phone network, which reveals my location, to monetize my private information. But I would love for something like Zcash or another equivalent to become an option for people to transact privately. I don't think it's going to become like our nation's public good. Sort of money, and there would be problems about that in terms of the supply. I don't know, but I would love it to be an option, just the way Signal is an option that's much better than the other, WhatsApp. Meta surveils all your metadata on there, aptly named, I guess, Meta. And so, I would love if that happens. Great. But I'm agnostic as to how we get to solving this problem, and I see that as an important thing. I'm just concerned that the government not nip anything in the bud, and the government will want to overreach. We recognize their interests, but at the same time, we also know they're going to want to surveil everything down to the penny, and we need to figure out how to not let them kill any of these sort of incipient ideas that are out there.
Yeah, so we've been talking quite a bit about financial privacy, but it's about more than that, isn't it? It's about how we identify ourselves online in a host of applications and arenas. And Zooko did his demonstration where he's just strictly about revealing your identity. And Jay, that's an area that you've worked on like quite a lot lately, like outside of financial privacy, isn't it?
Yeah, and I see it as parallel in some ways. I think we're at a turning point with digital identity as well. There's an enormous amount of ferment, and I hear from people like, yes, we're working on a privacy-protecting digital identity, and the W2.3 is working on something, and the VCs are gaining momentum, and there's all this interesting work being done, but it's threatened to all be steamrolled by this very suboptimal, not particularly privacy-protective ISO standard that has been embraced by the DHS and the TSA, is being pushed by AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, which is the sort of association of the DMVs. And like, these are institutions that have the power to put something in all of our wallets, physical as they have, digital.
Yeah.
And once that happens, we're going to be stuck with the standard, and it threatens to steamroll all this other innovation and work that's being done and just end it, and we're going to be stuck with this for decades. And so we're pushing state legislatures to pass laws, and I just came out with a piece 2 weeks ago that says if our state is to have a digital driver's license, it must have these 12 qualities. They include things like, don't phone home to the DMV every time you present it, so that the DMV gets a bird's eye view of all your presentations. Make sure that there are techniques in there for protection against tracking by verifiers. So if I prove that I'm over 21 to a 7-Eleven like 10 times a year, 7-Eleven doesn't get a unique identifier. Even though I'm not giving them my name, I'm only proving I'm over 21, they still don't get a unique identifier with which to concatenate that. And so there's technological features that we think need to be built into a digital ID, but also legal protections such as protections against being asked at every turn for your digital identity, which is the big threat because it becomes so easy to present a digital identity that everybody's going to be asking, including online. You want to watch a YouTube video? Press here to send it to your digital driver's license. And now you can't walk into any, 7-Eleven wants to make sure, or Target wants you to scan your driver's license when you enter so that in case you turn out to be a shoplifter. Shoplifting's a huge problem. No, there's a solution, and it's going to happen. Overnight, we're going to wake up one day and everybody's going to basically need this digital driver's license that's being pushed in the States if we're not careful. So I think that it's at a similar inflection point to financial privacy.
Marta, anything you want to build on there?
I feel I guess I want to plus one everything he said. I feel deeply divided about digital identity. I also feel deeply divided about digital identity because of all of those worries. And similarly, I feel when it comes to like CBDCs, for example, I understand there is a very there is a want to be like, let's build a CBDC that's privacy protective, and I just find it very, very hard to believe that that is actually what will end up happening, or that a CBDC that is privacy protective in the short term won't just normalize it such that the next version is not privacy protective. And the idea of living in a world where not only does the government have the ability, as it does now, to sort of engage in mass surveillance of transactions, but actually all of your transactions are effectively handed over to the government by default is completely terrifying to me. And so while I understand that there are efforts out there to bake privacy into a CBDC, I'm just deeply, deeply unsettled by the idea.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, it's the security agencies are going to be pushing hard for any CBDC to be something that becomes a surveillance coin. I do think that there could be big upsides to a CBDC if it were done right, as opposed to some who think like, no, never, never, never. But it does terrify me. It looked a couple of years ago like a CBDC was a freight train coming down the tracks. Biden was putting an executive order out, calling it the highest priority of his administration, and so forth. And so we were like, if you're going to do it, you have to do it this way, or are we going to we're going to go to the mat over it. Now it doesn't seem like there's as much momentum behind it, and it could very easily make things worse than they already are. But the way things already are now is terrible. So we do need some sort of,
I think there's a lot of agreement in the room on that. What you mentioned, like the threat of potentially being steamrolled by the sort of bureaucratic apparatus. There are these pilot projects out there. How do you short circuit this process? If we have like the tool, the machinery of government is moving forward in this sort of inexorable way, but we want to get in there with potentially a better solution. How do you do that?
On ID or?
Well, I think it applies. Almost sort of domain agnostic.
Yeah, I mean. It's tough. I mean, I think you have to activate people. I think on digital ID, for example, there's an enormous constituency on the right and on the left of people who care a lot about privacy in that area. When we fought Real ID during the Bush years, we got a lot of support from red state legislatures who passed laws. I think it was 17 states passed laws that says you shall, to their DMVs, you shall not comply with this. And as a result, we're like, what is it? They're supposed to come into effect. It was passed in 2005, supposed to come into effect in 2008. It's 2024, still not in effect. Totally. TSA keeps playing chicken and threatening to make everybody have a Real ID to fly, but they're never really going to do that. And they're about to bump it back again.
Really?
Yeah. So, I think that if people start talking about these digital driver's licenses as a national identity system, it will freak a lot of people out, and I'm already hearing from allies who are ACLU sympathetic state legislators,
Yeah.
but also like MAGA state legislators who are very concerned about this.
Interesting.
And so the question is whether we sleepwalk into it or whether there's a fight.
Yeah, interesting. We have a few minutes left, and I want to get some folks in the crowd if they're interested in on the conversation. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts, questions for our guests? Everybody is totally convinced of everything we've said. That's been said.
While somebody's thinking of a question, I think there's that whole battle of the digital ID, but I think there'll be a similar battle with currency and whether the government is going to really, to what extent they're going to fight, a privacy protective coin or what have you, that isn't something that's used for billions of dollars by North Korea, where they can point to that, but is used by ordinary people for ordinary transactions.
Yeah. And we haven't even really talked about we haven't even gotten into corporate interests about, whose business models, as you said, Marta, rely totally on access to unfettered access to user data. Yeah, Paul.
So we've had a very U.S.-centric conversation, and I'm just wondering, so the European Union is considering like a CBDC or a digital euro. There's a bunch of countries that are taking action. From your sort of observation point, are there countries that have come to a reasonable balance between security and privacy that are worth emulating?
I work for the American Civil Liberties Union. We're kind of provincial, but I'm not, some people look like audience members have an answer to that. If that's what you're raising your hand for, then.
I have an answer to that,
Okay,
which is like, in theory, the United States, right? Like, in theory, if you look at the Constitution, like what the Constitution says is, privacy is the default, right? The government isn't allowed to have access to your information unless they have a reason for it and they go and get a warrant. And to me, that is a great balance, right? That is a fantastic balance between the idea of protecting security, solving crimes, and the reasonable sort of needs of law enforcement with the civil liberties of people. So the problem is that has been fundamentally undermined by the third-party doctrine and other things. But fundamentally, without that giant loophole, I think the U.S. has got it exactly right.
Jay, Congress recently extended tax code section 6050I, the cash reporting requirement for trades or businesses to include digital assets. And I know where Marta stands on this, but even beyond that, of course, the central argument here is that there is no third party. This is direct reporting of information not handed over voluntarily or otherwise to any intermediary. Curious about the ACLU's position on that and interest in tracking of that type of issue, and in particular, that provision 26 U.S.C. 6050I.
Yeah, we don't organizationally have a position on that, and I haven't looked at it that closely. But generally, we think that digital currency should be regulated like cash is, and not like banks are, in the sense that it should be your obligation to report, transactions that are over $10,000, and there shouldn't be constant affirmative monitoring, and we shouldn't expect to build compliance and enforcement into the technology and into the systems. They're not built into cash, so why should they be built into these other things? So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer for you at all. Probably not, but sorry.
Thanks, Paul. Jay, Marta, it's great to see you guys. I really liked your points about the mobile driver's license and the ISO standard being dominated by big players. As many of you know, some of the DMVs are working primarily with Apple and Google to build these wallets for our digital assets. And I think some of you guys know I'm now working on legal research as to what counts as true ownership of not just digital assets, but these assets can also be identity assets, right? With MDLs being a good representation. What are your thoughts on the fact that these wallets are primarily built by Apple and Google, and what can we do to provide more self-custodial wallets?
One of the things that we had in the piece that I released the week before last, one of our 12 requirements is that there be an open wallet ecosystem that's not dominated by an oligopoly, and that state legislatures, we have legislative language, suggested legislative language in there, in which state legislatures mandate that that the DMV only supply, driver's license tokens or what have you, where there's like rules in place that the ecosystem is open.
Okay, from your lips to Congress's ears. Thank you both so much for this great conversation. A round of applause for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.